Welcome, everyone, to the Nerd Journey Podcast, episode number 185. We're joining you every week to talk IT career progression and bring you the advice we wish we'd been given earlier in our careers. I'm your host, John White, at VJourneyman on Twitter, joined by my co-host, Nick Cordy, at NetworkNerd_. Hey, Nick, how's it going?
Hey, John, I'm doing great. We are pre-sales technical engineers with backgrounds in IT operations. We hope our career discussions will be vendor neutral, relevant across disciplines, and remain timeless. If you're enjoying our content, please drop us a positive review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you subscribe. And if you want to get in touch with us, tweet or DM at Nerd Journey. DM's wide open. Ultimately, we're just two nerds on a journey.
A journey to career enlightenment.
So let's take a trip.
Today is the first part of a conversation that we had with a new interviewee. And believe it or not, it is, I believe, a two-parter.
I was shocked to find that it was two parts.
Yes.
I mean,
hardly ever will we go over one episode with one person. But Phil Monk was special that way, and it led to a two-parter, unlike every single other interview that we've done. Well, okay, that's not true at all. But more to the point, on Phil, really cool conversation. The things that stuck out for me that, I hope that people listen out for were kind of that early on, like, how does this work curiosity, and kind of the fearlessness about breaking things as part of taking them apart to learn how they do work. And maybe some like early exposure to that from like trades that the family was in. I thought that it was interesting. It made me wonder if that's a learned behavior rather than an innate ability or innate behavior. You know what I mean?
yeah, I definitely do. And now that you mention it, I do not know the answer. I think listeners should pay special attention to the scenario where Phil manages to get into an advanced IT course in college because of the fact that he got to use a different medium for the test.
Yeah.
That's foreshadowing for something that will come up later in the episode.
Yeah, it's fascinating how to learn a little bit more about how Phil's brain works. I also thought that, we got into it a little bit with like differences between the United States and the UK, educational systems, dipped our toes a little bit into, class differences and how they're recognized in the UK versus the US. I think mostly that was me mouthing off, but I still think it was interesting.
It wasn't too ranty, and John wasn't on the soapbox for too long, if that makes everybody feel better.
Awesome. Anything else to signpost before we get into the episode?
Last thing I'll say is remember that while some people could think of a certain quality or situation as a weakness, others could look at it as a strength. Think about that as you listen to this episode.
So let's get into episode 185, part 1 with Phil Monk. Phil Monk, welcome to the Nerd Journey Podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's awesome to be here.
Awesome. Hey, can you tell us what it is that you do today?
Yeah, sure, no worries. So I currently work in VMware in the UK, well in EMEA, and I'm based for a team called Critical Accounts, which is the highest form of escalation in VMware. When you have a challenge or a problem that either your account team or GSS log, and you go through a number of normal processes, if that all fails, then you inevitably come to us. But we don't fix the problem in a break-fix way like GS do. We tend to stabilize and then look at the customer's sort of wider architecture, the operational challenges, try and understand why their issues were caused, where they came from, what the background is, and then also, work on the impact to the business and try and sort of resolve those issues and move the customer along. We tend to engage for a bit longer as well. So we're engaged for sort of normally about 90 days, 3 months with the customer to stabilize them and do that sort of architectural operational piece. It's very different, but I really enjoy doing it. Something I've done for a while now.
Oh, that's really cool. You said it's a fairly new team at VMware?
Yeah, I mean, they've had escalation teams for a while, but normally they, like I said, they go in, do break fix, and then they sort of leave. But with the complexity of some of the solutions that come out of VMware at the moment, we don't help ourselves in many ways. So there's teams like myself that that go in and do sort of the wider engagement to enable customers to consume in a much better way. We've been around sort of like 2021 was when we started. Yeah, we divided from the customer success team.
Got it. Got it. So I'm guessing that it has to do with kind of complex customer architectures and trying to figure out maybe architecturally patterns that could be done better.
Yeah, essentially, yeah, that's one of the challenges. The other is that we see a lot of the time is operational. So, we do a very bad job at VMware of enabling customers to consume our solutions and software in an easy way. So a lot of the work that we're starting to do now and drive towards with other teams as well, like PSO and the TAM community, is try and drive some more of that operational awareness. And you'll hopefully see soon some productized offerings that are going to come out of VMware around that as well, which have been driven by myself and some of the other people in my team as well, and some of the principal community as well that's putting those together.
Nice.
Yeah, hopefully.
I'm just trying to remember my VMware lingo. The PSO is professional services organization,
Yeah, that's
and the
correct. Yeah, yeah.
and the TAMs are the technical account managers.
That's correct. Yeah. Sorry,
Okay.
we're a company of acronyms, so I sometimes forget that other people don't always know what they are.
Every company is a company of acronyms.
And GSS is Global Support Services for reference too.
That's
Ah, yeah. So that's
correct.
the one I didn't remember. It's
Yeah.
been almost 3 years since I left VMware, and I've lost my card, my decoder card. So,
Ah, fair enough.
could we maybe back up, Phil, and talk a little bit about how you got into the tech industry? Like, how far back does that go?
Yeah, I mean, I started in the IT industry when I was 17 in 2004. That might give you an inkling to my age. Anyone that can do some quick maths and understand that. But it was largely down to my dad. My dad, when I was 12, 11, brought us a computer and put it in our living room. And back then, in the 90s, a computer was a very expensive thing to buy, and we weren't a very well off family. So my dad, went out of his way to try and buy us and enable us to be able to experience that. It took me a week to pull it apart and have it across the living room, and then which he wasn't very happy about, but was okay when I sort of could put it back together. It did take me a few weeks to put it back together, but that was my sort of first exposure into knowing that I wanted to do technology. I was fascinated by how everything worked, and then I started doing coding on it. It was a Windows 95 machine, I think it was. So I was doing DOS and all things like that. And then he bought me a Commodore 64 because you could do easier programming on that. We recorded tapes and started trying to build games and things on that, which was really interesting. And then I sort of just had a passion and an interest for trying to learn new things around it. So when I went into school in the UK, we do GCSEs, which I think they're equivalent to tests you guys do in high school in the States. You can choose basically what subject you want to do. So I chose IT, and they point blankly refused because I'd been a menace to them during the years that I was there, and not specialising that subject, changing the backgrounds on computers and turning the login screens upside down, and just doing mischievous things that teenagers do. But outside of that, I then went to college, and you have to do in the UK, when you choose to do a college course, they tend to do an aptitude test. So they make you sit down and do like a 20-minute test that you're supposed to learn if you're right for the courses or not. So I did one for sort of the bottom grade of the IT courses that they were offering. And largely that was because I didn't get very good results in my tests because I was diagnosed as dyslexic quite late on, but I didn't get a lot of help. So the tests were difficult for me to do. And then, but I did the test on the computer for the college course, and I sort of aced the first one. They gave me the second one, I aced that. And they gave me the third one, and I did okay on that. So they put me in the higher course, which was unusual for sort of someone my age. And then, yeah, sort of went from there. I really enjoyed my time at college, learnt a lot, and was picked up by a company called T Systems, who was based in UK. I mean, I'm sure loads of people know them. They're a global SI, but they used to go around the colleges in Milton Keynes and pull out people that were okay and then stick them in front of monitoring desks. So that's how I started my career.
That's awesome. I wanted to ask about that instinct to take apart the computer.
Yeah.
To back up there, is that I'm guessing it's not the first time that you were tinkering and experimenting and breaking things. Am I right about that?
Yeah, I've always had an interest in how things work. I mean, my dad was a mechanic or worked in the motor industry most of his life. So pulling engines apart and gearboxes apart, and building go-karts was something that I used to do with him and my granddad. So I always had this instinct. If I wasn't sure how something works, I was going to figure it out. So pulling it apart was natural. When you did that with a computer, there's no moving bits in it. So it was then trying to understand, okay, if there's no moving bits in this, how does that bit over there talk to that bit, and what does it do when you tell it to do this? So yeah, that sort of made me very more inquisitive in trying to learn more about that.
And you can't figure out how something works until you've successfully taken it apart and put it back together, right?
Yeah, completely. As long as when you put it back together, it works.
Well, exactly, exactly. No guarantee that will happen, but
Yeah,
it's all
yeah.
part of the tinkering and learning process. You have to mess it up a couple times. I will say, when it comes to electronics, you got to be careful when you turn the power on, especially if you have it wired wrong.
Yeah, completely. I mean, I started building computers not long after I pulled the family one apart. My dad used to take me to computer fairs, and we used to buy bits and build new gaming computers for myself at the time. I used to play Carmageddon quite a lot, Roller Coaster Tycoon, Unreal Tournament, and those sort of games. So building PCs to make them, and then I at college started to build them, and was found that I was quite good at building them in unusual things. So we built them in fridges and overclocked them and things like that, and we built them in alloy wheels because obviously my dad's been in the motor industry. I had loads of them lying around, and yeah, so we started building them. I had some in some magazines actually, Custom PC magazine in the UK, if in the early 2000s, if anyone remembers that.
Oh, that's so cool. And what did you do when T Systems picked you up, Phil? What was the line of work there?
So I was one of the ones that they picked up and stuck in front of a monitoring desk, like I mentioned. But it was a great sort of foothold into the industry. At the time in Milton Keynes, where I lived, there were so many SIs that were running service desks and monitoring desks. There was Detronics, there was Pink Brigade, there was Computer Centre, T Systems as well, and a company called GIDAS, which was a smaller one. But yeah, I learned a lot there, and eventually progressed into support while I was there, because I got again that itch for trying to understand how things happened. I could see them flashing on a screen and wanting to understand what was broken and how to fix it. I started pestering the people I was calling up, and then when they realised that actually I could fix the problem, they wouldn't have to get out of bed, but they could still be paid for getting out of bed. Then they decided that they were going to enable me to fix them, which was quite interesting.
Oh, that's fascinating. So the monitoring desk is kind of like in a network operations center or like some kind of operations center.
Yeah, basically, yeah, we were in the basement like most people's experiences of Knox and sort of operation centres, and then yeah, with the screens everywhere. As soon as something went red and made a noise, you had to look at it.
It's a interesting entry point because you kind of see things from a very, very high level and not like a low level. Like you don't have like if you start in support, then people are calling you up to say, hey, this stopped working and I need you to fix it. And if you start in monitoring, then you see an alert that says, oh, this thing isn't working and you need to call somebody else.
Yeah, you see the symptom rather than the result, which is one of the things that was quite interesting, because you could see, for example, like one of the customers for T Systems at the time was Daimler Chrysler, and used to do parts orders for a mainframe. So you could see the mainframe, maybe slowing down and not processing their orders, and then the following day you'd have some of the Daimler sort of help desk phoning up saying dealers haven't got parts and stuff like that. So you could see the relation between a problem starting and what the impact of it was, sort of in the wider community, which not everyone appreciated, but I did. I understood it, and thought it was quite important to understand.
Sorry, I was laughing off mic. But
That's
yeah,
all right.
I could certainly understand, somebody higher up not appreciating that somebody saw it ahead of time and then wasn't empowered to actually fix it, and
Yeah.
that can lead to some action. Hopefully, it can, even if it's informal. It sounded like it was a little bit more like informal enablement to like allow you to actually fix things. Is that right?
Yeah, it was. So again, I was really lucky with the manager I had in the monitoring desk, and the manager of the team that I primarily was interested in the issues for, which was a Wintel and VMware team. They, I think they sort of realised that I was genuinely interested by some of this stuff. I mean, a lot of the guys on the monitoring desk the young guys would come in, they maybe would do it for 6 months and didn't like the shift pattern and leave. But I was there for 18 months, and a lot of the other guys had been there. I'd hate to say lifers, but they were, long time been there, not interested in progressing their career, liked the salary, liked the shift pattern. So it was sort of something that was just comfortable for them. But I was interested in it. So the Wintel VMware manager gave me access to stuff, gave me some informal training. And then I eventually started, going in my shift pattern, my 4 days off and 4 days on in the time between, actually going up to Brougham Wood where they were based, and working with them to understand all in my own time. That was the drive that I had to try and learn more and want to progress my career with them. And then eventually they offered me a job, which was in support, doing second line at the time, and was double the salary I was earning in the monitoring desk. And I saw it as a good way into something different. So I took it.
And not everybody wants that level of learning to really understand deeply how something works. They just want to fix the problem as soon as possible. And sometimes that results in a continual placing of the Band-Aid on the problem. That's my observation.
Yeah, definitely. I'd agree with that based on a number of things that I saw as well. Especially again, even moving into the support team, there was it was divided into two. The Wintel team, you had like a project team that did everything that was new and exciting, which intrigued me, but wasn't something that I wanted to straight away aggressively try and get into. So I, sort of honed my skills and learnt a lot more doing the support side of stuff. And yeah, there were four of us when I started, and when I left that team eventually after some time, there were two of us, me and one other guy, because we were both really interested in what was going on, and we were doing nearly all the calls. So they moved the other staff to other places. But yeah, it was interesting. I learnt so much there, and I was so grateful for both the managers in the monitoring side and in the support side for giving me that opportunity, because I didn't have any university degree or anything like that. I just had my college higher national diploma, it was called, that I came out of with.
Can I ask a little bit about that? In the UK, is there the ability to get a college diploma in something like IT?
Yeah, there is. It's so we have what we call GCSEs, which are what you would leave, what we call secondary school. They're starting to call it high school here. They're inheriting a lot of the American naming, and then you would do something called A levels, which is sort of like your next step to get into university. But then if you didn't get good A levels, you would normally convert them to either a diploma or something like that, in a specific area. But diplomas and NVQs, I think, they're not really well thought after education levels. They're sort of the level that you get if you're okay, not if you're exceptional. But it was what I got because of some other challenges with around my dyslexia, and that not being identified quite late, and as well, and not really wanting to go to university. There was nothing that I've never really felt a need to go there, to want to do it. All of my learning, I preferred to do hands-on and experience and stuff like that. So that was why I took that different path.
Is there a class signifier in going to university? That's one of those things that is different from the US and the UK. In the UK, there's kind of this very clear understanding of class boundaries, and in the US, we really work very hard to pretend that they don't exist.
Yeah, that's a great question actually, because without getting too political, because things at the moment in the UK with politics are scary to say the least. Yeah, there is a differentiation there. We had the political party that was in when I was in school, made it so that it was free to go to university for certain level of earners, and based on how much your parent earned, but largely everyone would go for free. Now the current government, they changed it I can't remember, it's probably 6-7 years ago. You have to pay fees, and it's around about £10,000, £12,000 a year to be able to go to university, and parents have to pay that. So you only go if you're rich, but previously you could go even if you weren't. But yeah, it can be a class sort of defining level of education, I think, in the UK still.
I've read and heard that it's very true in the US as well. I mean, there's interviews to see if you're a good fit, and
Yeah.
For sometimes really what that means is is this person class appropriate, and that's a very like nebulously defined thing in the States, but it's like kind of the I know it when I see it, and because it's so unacknowledged, it's a very insidious little filter. But
Yeah, no, I understand. Yeah.
yeah, it's just something that I'm striving to understand. So anytime there's a hint of it, I always like to ask. I don't know, because in the U.S. we can say like working class, although we tend to say like blue collar versus white collar jobs, but we also like to pretend that there's a lot of mobility and a desire for mobility from like working class to like a more of like a white collar background. And
Mm.
I don't think that there necessarily is. Like sometimes it's very uncomfortable to take that like step across a hard class boundary to say, I'm leaving everything that I know and all the people that I know and going someplace where I don't have any support network.
My wife went to university because she wanted to be a teacher. So one of that's a job where you have to go to university. So, and she's from the same background as me, same attitudes and everything. So, yeah, she went because she had to. If she's probably going to listen to this because we listen to podcasts and we go to sleep, so she's definitely going to listen to this. She hated a second and third year of university. So, yeah, it was something she had to do, but not necessarily, really enjoyed.
Okay, sorry. Didn't want. I hope that wasn't like super sensitive. Like
No, no,
again,
not
like
at
I
all.
said, it's in the U.S. It's like class is this like really unacknowledged thing that I'm pretty curious about.
I have a comment on top of that. Speaking of acknowledgement, sometimes when people call support, all they want is acknowledgement that someone hears them, understands the problem, and is trying to fix it, not necessarily an immediate solution. You mentioned, Phil, that it came easy for you figuring out how to deconstruct and reconstruct things. What's your take on how well you adjusted to the communication side and talking with people who might be a little upset? Yeah, I mean, because if you've been in support, then you know that you're going to get some upset people. It's just a natural part of the game.
I mean, as a 19, 20-year-old, it was a bit of a shock to the system when you got, when I progressed up to third line support inside that team, and essentially had people phoning me, shouting at me when stuff wasn't working, and I was a bit like, initially, just a bit taken back by it, and like, whoa, I'm here to help you, just calm down and we can move things forward. But you learn those skills very very quickly. I think. Well, I did anyway. I'm pretty outgoing. If there's a group of people standing there and no one's talking, I'll start talking to people, try and find something in common, and generally I think have quite a good level of communication and demeanour, and so I've been told anyway by people that I've worked with. So I adapted to it relatively quickly. I'm not going to say I was perfect. I made mistakes, said things to people I shouldn't have done. Even at times got upset at people shouting at me. I've recall one thing actually when I was actually not in the T Systems role, but in one of my next roles in consulting, where I made a mistake where when I was implementing something for a council in in the UK, and took down some of their production infrastructure, and 3 or 4 people shouting at me, and I just broke down crying because I didn't know how to deal with it in that type of situation. So there's no harm in that. There's no, I don't think, shame in admitting that, but it's something that you do to learn. So it took me a while to learn how to overcome certain situations, but I found it a natural progression, a natural way to learn how to deal with people like that.
You mentioned the move to consulting. That's a little bit different than support. Can you shed light on what made you want to jump into that?
Yeah, sure. So I mentioned that in the T Systems team they had a project side of stuff, and then they had the support side of stuff as well. So I learned loads in support. How people consume stuff, how they consume software, their expectations on their consumption and their experience. And also, I learned the importance of things like availability and performance of applications and infrastructure and networking. I learned so much, absorbed it all over 2 years of doing that role, and then started working with a gentleman inside the project team, a guy called Tony Butler, who was probably didn't realise it, but was actually a mentor of mine at that sort of age, telling, helping me understand where to go and helping me understand how to design stuff and what the importance was of not just going, oh, you click here, 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 and then there you go, bang, there's your software. Actually understanding how to shape it to what a business wants. And he was mainly Citrix focused, so that was even before I got into Microsoft and VMware side of technology for designing, etc. So I learned a lot from Tony at that stage, and there came a part when T-Systems decided they were going to outsource support, and so I was looking, being young, not really knowing what that meant. I straight away just went to find a new job and found a role in a little consultancy company called Kudos, who actually now have transitioned to another company, but. Yeah, I learned a lot there. I worked there for 6 months as on a short-term contract, and just learned so much around consultancy with going to customers, asking them questions, actually writing stuff down, and not just going hands-on straight away and installing software and building stuff, but actually that side of stuff. So it was a natural progression that was kicked by my role not being in support anymore, and me looking for something new to do.
I feel like there's this consulting approach that really good support engineers take when they're trying to fix a problem. I mean, did you learn some of the consulting recommendations from the time in support other than shadowing Tony?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've not really thought about that, but thinking about some of the processes that I sort of followed there, yeah, they would have been focused on things that I had learned in the support process. So like failures and, in the way that certain areas of Microsoft was what I was sort of going into when I was in the consulting space, as well as the VMware piece. So learning how things there failed did impact, the decision paths that I was taking around how to make decisions on architecture and design. And I think that was a great skill to have and a great piece of experience to have, because you firsthand understand how people try to operate and use something, so you understand maybe some of the decisions that you're going to take during the design implementation as to what the impact of those is, and it does help you make the right decisions, not necessarily always the right decisions, but it does help you consider a lot of areas, definitely.
Yeah, that's fascinating. That feedback, especially as you go through something, if you're going to stay with it a little bit more, you start to understand a little bit why there are like architecture design philosophies and like processes that people work through, and why that has become a thing. Not, that any specific process, is important, as long as you have a process that encompasses a lot of, discussions with the customers and figuring out exactly what it is that they need, and the things that they can and can't do, and what they can and can't spend, and things like that.
Yeah, most definitely.
So that move from support to consulting, you've now gotten like 3 different views of the same industry, right? The kind of monitoring role, that high level, hey, I see things going wrong and maybe I should call somebody to tell them. And then I don't want to simplify it as break fix, but I'll say support role, where you're actually like, actively taking part in fixing, something. And then now the project side, where you're actually building the architecture that is going to cause the failure. That was a joke there. The architecture in which failures can occur.
Yeah, and for me, it was all of that was within 5 years of starting my IT career. So from 17 to my early 20s, that was where I sort of found myself at that point. I continued in consulting for a number of years, working for a number of partners from VMware and Microsoft, and moved around 1 or 2 other companies, and found myself in a role where I was doing a managed services type consultancy role, as well as some professional services type role. And that was in a company called Virtualize IT that was eventually acquired by Virtustream. For those that don't know, Virtustream was formed by about 11 companies that were all brought by an investment organization and sort of piled together. But Virtualize IT was the largest one at the time that they acquired. So yeah, that's where I found myself then.
Doing professional services work, that's the implementation side of the consulting gig. And I guess when I hear about the term consultant, I often think of both implementation and the planning and architecture and design of the solution. I guess maybe that's not always the case.
Yeah, I suppose in the smaller organisations that I worked for, after leaving T Systems, the QDOS, the virtualized IT, and eventually VirtuStream when they were, first formed, it was a very different sort of consultancy practice than what I did when I joined VMware. And well, even actually before I joined the company before I joined VMware, which was a company called Exor, which were channel services based. But yeah, you would find that you would tend to be the designer, the implementer, the short term support, and the short term sort of operational handover, and then maybe even some cases in those small companies, the project manager, which was a skill that I learned and was okay at, but was not something that I was ever enthralled with having to do as a project management pieces, trying to understand when I was going to be able to implement something and holding myself responsible for being able to meet a deadline. But it was a good skill to learn for planning and time estimates that ultimately helped when I did move to XOR and VMware for being able to give estimates for time and costing and stuff like that as well.
Oh, time estimates. Yeah, my wife will tell you I'm horrible at it. You can
Yeah.
say, hey, I'll be home in 30 minutes and an hour and a half later.
Yeah, well, that's the Microsoft time, isn't it? When you're restarting your computer and it says, "Oh, your updates will be done in 30 minutes," and you're still sat there 2 hours later.
Yeah, I guess I had a bad habit of just starting something that had the potential to take longer than I thought.
Yeah, definitely.
I guess I never thought about it, but of course it makes sense that time estimates for work is a skill that you start out at and you only nebulously have ideas about. If you're running statistical analysis, like your error bars would be pretty wide when you like pretty early on when you're doing those estimates. And then later on, like you start to be a little bit more sensitive to the various inputs that could cause like wide variation. And so you're asking
Yeah,
more questions. Am I on the right track there?
yeah, definitely. And I had a challenge where I think I've probably mentioned a few times. I'm dyslexic, so for me, my dyslexia affects my ability to be able to read quickly. So I don't read fast at all, and that's quite common for people that suffer from dyslexia, that they read slowly, and they also have to sometimes repeat subjects and material several times to be able to understand and process it properly. So that's something that I had to then start to build into estimates that I was giving people of time for work that I was going to do. And I also had to, doing documentation was also a challenge because I would write things down a lot slower and it would take me longer to do design documentation because I would produce a design, I would read it back after I'd produced it, but I would always read it how I expected it to be. So being able to have a design to a level that I could give to a customer, I'd have to put that design to the side for maybe 3 or 4 days, come back to it and read it afresh, and to then actually read it how it's written down and not how I expect it to be. So those sort of challenges I had to try and build into time estimates, and I didn't realise I had to build that into time estimates maybe until 2 or 3 years into my career.
That's fascinating. I think that it matches an experience that I've had, which was getting diagnosed with attention deficit disorder, like as an adult,
Mm.
not even in high school, and realizing like I have all these different coping skills that aren't necessarily healthy that I've had to work on, over the course of a couple decades to kind of undo. Yeah, that of course, like now that you say it out loud, it makes absolute sense that you're going to have those impacts, and it takes maybe kind of a slightly progressive organization to understand that and make accommodation for everything, all the implications there, right? Because like I don't know, like I've worked at VMware in the past, and they're just like, hey, please get this training done by this time, or and that's like the non-customer facing type of stuff. When it comes to customer facing type of stuff, it's like, ooh, the natural instinct would be like, oh, like Phil's just going to be slow at that, so we're not going to have him do that. But that really does not make any sense. Like, you have to do
Yeah.
all parts of things, or else the muscles atrophy, right?
Yeah, and I mentioned, some of the companies that I worked for outside of T Systems. So I didn't realise that while I was at T Systems doing support and monitoring, that it was affecting me that way. But some of the smaller companies that I went to afterwards, they were, really, obviously they need to earn money. So time is money to them. And me saying it's going to take me, another 4 days to do a design because I need to leave 2 days to be able to read it as it's written was not always something that necessarily went down very well. And I actually left one company. I'm not going to name them, but one company between that time where the female director that was responsible for the consultants basically turned around to me and said, "Well, if you can't do it in this time, then you may as well leave." So I resigned before I was sacked, basically, because they couldn't appreciate what I was explaining to them, around my dyslexia and around the challenges I had. But at the same time, they had customers banging on their door asking for me. So I think she was conflicted on which side to take. And unfortunately, I mean, you mentioned class earlier, and she was definitely a few classes above me, took the view of that. So I left that company for the pure reason that I felt like I couldn't work there because they didn't understand the challenges that I had in the way that I worked.
Yeah, that's an important one for management to understand the full human, get to know who they are as a person, the needs, But John, this reminds me of Bill Kendall and knowing the things that he needed out of a work environment. That rings so many bells.
Yeah, I think, we always have these experiences, some of them quite negative, like the one that you're describing. It sounds like, a combination of not understanding what we weirdly call disability, maybe different ability is like, it's just so strange that how we progress and like how those like negative things that impact us can in the end help shape, what it is that we are go looking for when we're looking for that next job. When we have the luxury of saying, here is my ideal work environment, the things that I need my employer to appreciate about me are, and then you start to solidify that list. I don't know, did that ever happen to you? Did you like kind of more consciously realize, oh, this is something that I need my employer to understand and appreciate about me?
I think that really sort of happened when I moved to Exor, which was the company that I was at before I came to VMware. So we were delivering professional services consultancy to the channel, and that's actually there's a story how I got into VMware which comes from that, which is quite interesting. I'll cover that maybe in a little bit later. But it was when I got to that company that I realised. I mean, they hired me because I'd come recommended from some of their customers, the channel customers who had used me previously. And I was looking for a new position, and they reached out to me and offered me a position. I mean, I went in and interviewed, and I was very transparent with them. At that point, I'd learned that I needed time, and I certain things that I also, coping mechanisms that I had is I used to record a lot of stuff on voice because some dyslexic people, myself included, short-term memory is something that affected. So at that point, for me, trying to cope with that sort of short-term memory issue when I was talking to customers, I used to record stuff on my phone. I've got a different mechanism now for dealing with it, but that's what I used to use then. So explained that to them. I also explained that, I preferred to use certain equipment and stuff like that. And they were really supportive. Brought me equipment that I needed, specific covers for my screen so I could see certain colours because I have challenges with colours as well as part of my dyslexia. Brought me some really nice fancy coloured whiteboard pens, which was always useful. And also, understood that when I was and outlaid to the customers that I was delivering to, that I would need that extra time. And sometimes it was fine with them, sometimes it wasn't, but it was something that at least the company that I was working for understood and supported and really, sort of allowed me to express it.
So if I'm hearing correctly, what you realized was that it's possible for somebody, an organization, to appreciate, understand, and make accommodations, whereas before it wasn't even in the realm of possibility.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, and it wasn't something that I consciously. I mean, you mentioned you weren't diagnosed till you're an adult. I wasn't diagnosed or confirmed as dyslexic. I don't like to say the word diagnosed because it makes it sound like you've got something wrong with you, but it's not. I actually see my dyslexia as a positive. Yeah, I was confirmed as dyslexic around the age of sort of 17. So I wasn't really things that I've been doing when I was younger, and my GCSEs that I took, and all of the challenges I had with reading the papers and stuff like that was it all sort of fell into place. I understood it a lot better when I was sort of coming out of my late teens into my 20s. So yeah, I hadn't at that point when I had that bad experience. That was then made me aware that actually, this next employer, if I tell them, then there's not going to be any of this awkwardness of them expecting me to do something I can't. So I just laid it out to them, and I was so happy that they understood and just embraced it, basically.
It sounds like you were almost relieved to know that that dyslexia is what it was for you. Like, give it a name. I'm having this challenge. I think that it's a mixed bag when people find out that they are dyslexic as to whether they accept it. Oh, now I understand myself better, or I just don't want to hear about this title and label because it just means I'm not great at something. And the reason I
Yeah,
say that is because my daughter is also dyslexic. And when we say dyslexia, it's an unexpected challenge in reading and or writing in an otherwise intelligent human. I mean, that's how
yeah,
I've heard it defined by Sally Shaywitz. But she actually had trouble and still has trouble. Maybe it's because she's 12, accepting that, that's just part of who she is.
yeah. And I can relate to that as well. When I was 12, 13, 14, all of my friends would be reading 2 or 3 books a month, and I'd struggle to read half a book, and most of the time lose interest in it because I'd forgotten most of what I'd already read. So I tended to, I can relate to that challenge as well, and I tended to try and move away from those sort of things. One of the things that I look at it from is actually that it gives me it makes my brain work in a different way of thinking of things. So, an example, a very simple example is, I was going for a promotion panel not so long ago, and they'd written something in the slide deck that they wanted us to use as a template to show what we were doing, as that around what VMware called epic values, which are values that they go through. So, and they'd said, oh, you've got to use 2 examples of the epic values, and I interpreted that as 2 examples for every value, but everyone else on the board interpreted it as 2 values. So they presented 2 slides, and I presented something like 12 around that subject. And I was asked, why have you done so many slides? I said, well, you asked us to do this, and well, that's not actually what we meant. But just a very simple example, but it just shows that my brain processes things in a slightly different way.
That ambiguity.
Yeah,
Part of me says like, well, we should be less ambiguous, and there's also the danger of becoming like the legal profession where things are just overly specific in every single way. So yeah, I totally understand it. I mean, I stopped using the phrase bi-weekly, right? What does that mean? Does that mean twice a week, or does that mean every other week?
yeah, that's a great example.
It means both. So so maybe we shouldn't say things that could mean 2 different things, and does mean 2 different things, or can be interpreted in multiple different ways. And it is, I think, this kind of like, until somebody interprets it differently in a context where it impacts them and their performance, like, people don't pay attention to ambiguity, which is, interesting in the context of some kind of like, a promotion board where theoretically they're judging you for things like specificity and
Yeah, ultimately, yeah, definitely.
my cheeky question would be like, did that impact the promotion performance of the person who wrote that slide? But that's
I at this point while we're recording this, I don't know the answer to that because it was only on Thursday that happened. So we'll find out. That was actually a principal promotion in VMware that I was going for. So it's quite a
Nice.
big step
Fingers
up.
crossed.
Yeah,
Yeah,
hopefully.
You'll
Yeah,
you'll
I'm
have
going
to
to look
let
pretty
us
stupid.
know.
I'm going to look pretty
No,
stupid if I
no.
don't get it now. But yeah.
yeah. So I'm sorry. Maybe I was being ambiguous there. Like I actually didn't mean like, your performance, but I meant the performance of the person who actually wrote the slide where it said two values.
Ah, yes, maybe. I'm not sure actually who wrote the slides, but I'm definitely might
Yeah,
ask that afterwards.
yeah.
One thing I didn't pick up on earlier, Phil, you mentioned challenges in reading. Were there also challenges in writing? Like if you have to type up a document and make a design, for example, was that also a challenge?
Yeah, definitely. Actually, physical writing with hand. Most dyslexic people have very similar handwriting, and it's due to coordination. But coordination doesn't always affect people with dyslexia in the same way as, say, someone with dyspraxia, as an example, who was more coordination dependent. But what a lot of they teach a lot of people in college in the UK anyway around techniques on that is try and teach you touch typing. And when I was in college, and that was when I was confirmed as dyslexic, and they offered me some help. The lady that was helping me was actually trying to teach me how to touch type, and she was saying, "Right, look at the screen and type," and I'd look at the screen and I'd be reading what I was typing, and it would help. But what would happen is, and what you might see with a lot of people that have got dyslexia or dyspraxia when they're trying to do that, is they'll stop. So they'll type away, then they'll stop for a few seconds, and it's almost like your brain resets because you've overloaded it with trying to coordinate what you're reading, coordinate what you're typing, and be able to manage what you're doing on the keyboard. And it's really common. And I do a lot of volunteering in the Scouts in the UK, in an age group of between 14 and 18, and we see a lot. We do computer stuff there because that's what I know about. So we do stuff with them around there. And the young people that have got dyslexia there do exactly the same. And it's strange when you start seeing things that you notice in yourself, in other people, and also in younger people that are coming through that maybe don't understand why they're doing it as well. But it's quite common to find that. And it is challenging. And the way I got over that was I eventually stopped touch typing, and I just type away now and then do the read back further later, to try and review it. And using things like Grammarly and other tools as well do help, but you don't want to use them in a way that you become reliant on them, but you can use them in a way that you do help.
Oh, that's interesting. I think you did mention that before. The time it takes to read back as written is what is the
Yes.
phrase that you used, and I didn't. I kind of went through my brain as I don't quite understand what Phil means by that, but I didn't think to follow up on it. But what you're talking about is kind of reading it to make sure that what you wrote is what you meant.
Yes. So if I read back something as soon as I've typed it, it could say, I could mean to type, I don't know, as an example, I'm going to be recording a podcast later, and then send that as a text to my wife. But what it could actually say is, I'm going down the shops to buy sugar. But I would read it as, I'm going to record a podcast later, because that's what I've expected it to actually say. And it can be that drastic sometimes as well. When you're doing design documents, it's normally words in the wrong place or the meaning of words wrong. So what I find when I do the readbacks, as I'll read a sentence and say I might miss the word I might miss that out as an example, and I'd read it back and I'd put that word into the sentence naturally when I read it. But then if I leave it a few days, or I put that document in a different type of situation, so maybe print it, or maybe transition it from a Word document to a PowerPoint or something like that, that changes your perception of it, then I'll read it back how it's actually written down, and I'll notice the mistakes, and I'll be able to fill them in.
Oh, I like the presentation change shift, causing you to be a little bit more careful with your editing. Because I've definitely heard my daughter say something like that. Like, hey, I hope you're saturated by this, but what she really meant would be satisfied.
Yes. Yeah.
Just the wrong word, but like if you listen carefully to what was spoken, you can go, "Oh, I bet they meant X."
Yeah, and that's a lot of people find themselves filling that in naturally when they're listening or reading to people. So I have people, if I'm doing a document, I've got loads of support in VMware now, and those are mentors and mentees that I work with, and those are people in my teams that understand the challenges that I have, and they'll quite happily read a document back. And the thing you get when they try and review it is they try to be, I hope you don't think I'm being too difficult or too harsh. Well, no. If I've done something wrong, just tell me. You're not the first person to tell me that I've spelt something wrong, or I've missed out a word, or I've done this in this way. And so some people sometimes think they're being a bit brutal when they're pointing things like that out. But I think as you go through, well, definitely for me, as I've gone through different companies and different people, and I've learnt ways of explaining it to people that they understand differently. ultimately the feedback, as long as they're not, blatantly having a go at you in their comments in the Word document or whatever, then, you appreciate them pointing stuff out, and it takes them time to go through and read it as well. So yeah, I'm always appreciative of people actually giving me feedback.
That's fascinating because it leads to just another idea, which is like the mental space of editing somebody else's document is non-trivial. We always think like, oh, hey, can you edit this for me? Or can you review this for me? And that is a mental space that is different from the creative space, right? Where you're giving somebody feedback on text and not on their personhood. And sometimes like those two things get mixed up in people. And it certainly leads to, I think it is the exact thing that leads to discrimination when somebody is ignorantly treating somebody with like, who is like, neurodiverse is the word that I'll use, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And treating them as if this difference in the way their brain works is like, and the implications on how, their output is different is this like, oh, they're different and that is a negative thing. And I'm going to treat them as if they are, oh, it takes them longer to get this thing done. The only thing that I know of is that they are incompetent. So I will treat them as if they are incompetent. And it's like that jump of like, this different path in my brain means that you are like, I'm going to treat that as if that is your like negatively impacting your whole personhood.
Yeah, I get that. Yeah, completely. And that becomes at the moment, I would say in VMware, and we should really go back to my transition into there because it's a good story that I like to tell. But yeah, my VMware at the moment, I'm asking people to review stuff that English isn't their first language, and and they're correcting me on my English and my spelling and grammar and things like that. And I have had on occasion people react in that type of way where they're like, well, if he can't get his first language right, and then this is my fourth language, then he must be an idiot. So they try to sometimes, follow down that path. But credit to, to everyone that I've had that situation within VMware. They, once I've pointed it out and once I've explained to them and they've listened and they've understood, their opinion has completely changed. I speak a little bit of German, not great. That, some people in Germany speak English far better than many people in England do. So it's understandable sometimes, I guess, how you can fall into that. But yeah, it's not always acceptable.
That's a good point, that understanding of the differences in others. You heard a little bit of the story of Phil's presentation to the principal review board inside VMware. I want to say a big congratulations to Phil Monk on achieving the principal title just recently. That's a big deal. We've had some episodes talking about that, what the principal title and role means across the industry with Andrew Miller, Scott Lowe, and some others. So good job, Phil. We're proud of you. And
yeah, congratulations, Phil. I'm glad to hear about that. I hadn't asked the question since we did the recording, so congratulations. I think that we just teased the idea of dyslexia. We didn't talk about any kind of like neurodiversity in the intro, so maybe we could address it now. I thought that it was fascinating to hear about Phil's dyslexia and how it operated, how he experiences it, what he does to get along in the world. It just made me think about dyslexia as a forcing function. And I know what everybody's thinking, like, John, why are you bringing differential equations into this?
Because you want to make your podcast partner / former math teacher's heart happy? Is that why?
Yeah. Except that I'm not. I'm really talking about the behavioral definition of a forcing function, where you do things to, make sure that there aren't unintentional errors in something. So the idea of of writing something and then having somebody else read it to go through a review process for basically almost everything. Like, that's fascinating. And, just the idea of having your brain work in a way so that you write something that is different from what you are thinking and intending to write, and then reading back the thing that you intended to write, not the thing that's actually written. I heard that and it immediately made me think, oh, there's definitely been times where I've done that, 100%. So it just made me think that this is something that maybe is like a general like issue with the human brain that some people just experience like on the high end. It made me want to do a lot more research and reading about dyslexia and maybe just neurodiversity in general.
That was interesting to me about the need to put something aside and read it back later so that you can detect the error. I hadn't heard that one, and having a daughter who is dyslexic as well, that's something that I'll definitely be keeping in mind. And it's not only having a brain that works differently, but the recognition that you have this and learning to, we'll just say, adapt or accommodate that when you're looking at the strengths that it brings. Sure, maybe there are some things that are going to be challenging, but there are certainly some strengths. Just like when we talked to John Tolles in episodes 129 and 130 about ADHD being kind of a superpower for him because he could overclock his brain or parallel process stuff.
Or the hyperfocus that comes along with ADHD.
Absolutely.
It wasn't a defining thing, though, right? That's the thing that I also got from the conversation. Like, it was woven into his being, but it wasn't. It was a aspect of what we talked about and not the only aspect of his being, but it was really cool to hear about.
Yeah, and that's a great point, John, because that goes into what he said about giving him feedback. If somebody sees that those challenges is the only aspect of his being, they're going to have trouble or feel bad about giving him feedback. And his comment was, listen, I want to correct the mistakes, so you need to give it the feedback because it's necessary.
Yeah, exactly.
Great point.
Well, anything else before we get out of here?
Last thing I want to bring up is this hunger to learn. We've heard a lot of people come on the show and have this big interest, big desire to learn more, get outside their area, expand their knowledge, expand the blast radius, reflecting back to Andy Serwich. But Phil spent his extra time on his days off shadowing a team he would later work on. I really love that story.
Yeah, that was a great story. And I think there are aspects of that story too where he had a manager pretty early on who was willing to let him explore new and different types of technology and, things that weren't necessarily in the portfolio, and regard that as a strength, to build him up rather than like a threat or why are you wasting your time that you could be working on my stuff. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Well, I think the managers were wise to recognize him as what former guest Jeff Eberhard would call a high flyer.
Yeah, there you go.
Ready to be off and doing something new. But that's it. We'll get out of here. Just a reminder, we want people to subscribe and give us a positive review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening. We want to know if we're being helpful and are always looking for interesting questions to ponder. We're collectively on Twitter @NerdJourney.
All right. Farewell, listeners. Tune in next time as the journey continues. I'm John White @VJourneyman, for Nick Cordy @NetworkNerd_, signing off.
Adios.